Fellas20 here and welcome back to Springwood. So, we've been working on a lot of neighborhoods lately and we're going to continue that because I do want to finish off this particular project, this big expansive residential area, before moving on to some other areas in Springwood. So we've got about 2 more episodes left of this particular area and then we're going to move on. I have been conscious that it might be getting repetitive, so I've decided to structure this episode a bit differently. We're going to be focusing on 4 types of communities within this neighborhood. The first one being another government housing area. We're going to build a retirement village. And then the last 2 communities are going to be a little bit more on the wealthier side and a bit more tailored to a particular style. And I guess you'd call it a housing estate, but I'm not really sure. I'm definitely no expert, and you guys know I barely do my homework. I actually really enjoyed your comments in the last video where I was talking about, I guess, government housing in America, and definitely hit me up again for this episode because I haven't really done any research. I'm purely basing this off Google Earth, and that is the extent of my research. So what we're building in the first little bit is we're going to build another government housing area, and I really enjoyed building the last one, and there's a huge amount in cities in general, but Los Angeles, there is just a real particular style of government housing that I guess was built around the same era. And, you know, I was really lucky enough to have something like this on the workshop by King Leno, and he actually mentioned in the last video that those assets that he created are actually based on this style of housing in Los Angeles. So I guess I'm pretty lucky to have something like this on the workshop that I can have access to, because I know working on other series, I have to splice and mix and, you know, change the way houses look just to fit a theme. Particularly in my Border Town series, you know, there's only a handful of Mexican architecture and buildings on the workshop, whereas there's a whole ton of stuff on like American cities. You know, you can pretty much find any type of building and, you know, any type of asset on the workshop that is sort of based around American, which is it's pretty awesome. Los Angeles is definitely one of those ones that's really handy to have. And of course, I am actually building in a late 80s theme, if you guys didn't catch that from the intro and the 2 years we've been running this series for. And somebody actually mentioned in the comments in the last episode that, because I was speaking about how these places are usually pretty under maintained and they're pretty dingy, and they mentioned that I shouldn't make it too old and dingy because they were probably built in the 80s. So this would probably actually be pretty modern for this time. So I kind of tried to do that in this episode. But generally these areas, these government houses, are made pretty cheaply just in general. So, you know, it's pretty hard not to make them look old. And this one definitely looks like it needs a little bit more attention in terms of maintenance. And these paths that I'm painting down, they work so well to really create the community feel, because all these houses are so well connected with these roads. And it was actually a little bit tricky as well with this area because it's not flat. We're building on quite a bit of a slope. I don't know if you can really tell from here, but you know, when I'm dragging down roads and placing down assets, some of them just don't really work in this area, which is a real pain. But I actually prefer this block than the last one I built for a couple of reasons. I think building on a slope creates a lot more uniqueness to it, and I always highly recommend people building their cities on uneven ground. That was a mistake I made in Border Town, where it was pretty much all flat, which might be true to that area, but you know, nowhere in the world is perfectly flat. You know, there is always some sort of unevenness in the landscape, and you know, building that series on a completely flat plane, it just I don't know, it's actually created a lot of problems for that series. Whereas Springwood, you know, actually probably should be built on a really flat area, you know, being Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a pretty flat city, you know, apart from the mountains. But yeah, the Springwood landscape is so hilly. I don't know if you've ever realized, but you know, every area within Springwood has some sort of dramatic change in landscape, which creates a lot of realism for me and a lot of variations in terms of what I'm building, but it does create a lot of problems when I am painting down things. Can be quite challenging. So this one is quite challenging to create, but like I said, I actually much prefer it than the one that I built in the last episode. And there is a couple of custom basketball courts that I create, and the car park and the parklands that I created around here. I really like the way it looks, and I think the general location right next to this concrete canal, I think it fits in really nicely too. And now I'm building in a completely different area, so we are jumping from area to area in this episode. We've got 4 communities to build, and I think I'm recording for about 17 minutes or something. So we're kind of going for a bit of a low detail community area because, like I said, I think every episode since Springwood's been back, I'm trying to go for low detail in this particular neighborhood because I'm really going for a more general feel of an area rather than going for a huge amount of detail. But despite that last community I just built was probably more on the detailed end than what this area is going to look like. So what I'm doing now is I'm building a retirement village. Now, I don't know if I can call this definitely a retirement village, but it's definitely a community that has a retirement vibe to it. And again, just looking at places around LA, but not taking any inspiration from one particular area, just I guess how these retirement villages generally look. And maybe this is like a village for people over 50, or maybe it is just a full-blown retirement village. I haven't really decided quite yet, but what I wanted to achieve was just a real slow and quiet neighborhood, something with some sort of community area and some walking trails around here. And it's actually not a very big block. It's quite a small area that I'm working with, but I did want to just try to connect things up a little bit, but definitely not as much as the government housing either. I guess with the small footprint of where this area actually sits, it's really tricky to connect it up with some of these footpaths because they're quite big footpaths. And also dressing it up a little bit nicer than the government block, of course, because people are paying some pretty good cash to live in a place like this. So not really any broken surfaces, and we've got some really nice footpaths around here, so some nice tiles, and of course somewhere for people to play tennis. I feel like that's the sport that people take up when they're retiring. I probably should have had some sort of golf course around here or something like that, but somebody was actually mentioning that I should do a golf course around here because this is a wealthier neighborhood. Probably would make sense to do that. But I guess another reason why this wouldn't be a great place for a golf course is it's really uneven. There's no flat areas, and some of the golf course assets, I think they need flat surface, but I don't know. Maybe I will do a golf course. I'll think about it. I don't know how interesting it would be for me to make that. Let me know in the comments if you want to see it. Alright, community number 3. So I have created something like this in Palmdale, another neighborhood within Springwood, and this one's a little bit, I think I've done a better job of this one than the last community I created in this style. And I guess what this is, it's got a bit of a tropical vibe to it, so there's lots of palm trees, and it's a bit sheltered because there's a lot of foliage around here. And this is a particular style that I notice in LA quite a lot, and I am taking ideas from a few different areas, but they all generally have the same sort of feel to them. Again, I'm using King Leno assets. He's created this great collection that, I don't know, I'm going to call it like a Caribbean Spanish architecture style, and which is very common with this type of community. I don't know, I guess that's like a real style that people like. And LA is definitely an area that's really, I don't know, they just go for that style. And I don't know if it's like an 80s fit. I don't know if these places were created in the 80s. Definitely keep me up in the comments. Once again, did not do my research, just jumped straight into it. And then after I built it, I was like, I don't know, is this was this built in the 80s or is this way too modern? It feels modern, but quite often I will have to go back and research whether a particular style of building is was built after the 80s, and I'm always quite surprised at how old, architecture is in cities. So, maybe this is totally fine. Maybe this is working within that within that era. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to just try to up the foliage in this area and try to make this whole area just look really nice with trees and hedges and swimming pools. Going for like a real tropical and summery vibe to this area. And I'm also trying not to go too heavy with the detail work, because I really am just conscious that the more props and detail put into these places, the less I'll potentially be able to build down the track. So just going for some real quick and easy styles of detailing. So these hedges I'm just placing down to, I guess, differentiate between some houses, but I'm really like, no one has their own private backyards. But I guess placing down the trees and using the hedges in just particular places, it really helps just to create a bit of detail and make it look like some people have some privacy, but generally no one has their own private backyard or front yards. And again, a really tight area. I am not working in a big area. I'm actually going for a type of style in Springwood at the moment, which I'm really enjoying, and that's really embracing the scale of this game and trying not to get hung up on how big and realistic neighborhood sizes are, and just going for what a size or what a scale would be like in City Skylines. So generally, if this was going to be to scale of a neighborhood with the houses and the roads, then technically a community at this size wouldn't exist, because it's pretty much like less than a block of land, really. And, if I was going to create it to a realistic size and scale, then I probably would have to extend it probably about 5 times the size of this. So it's kind of, when looking out from a really far distance at Springwood, it makes a lot of sense where everything is. But, in terms of what city scale is in real life, then it's really just out of whack. But I'm actually really enjoying working to this scale, and it's only since working with Marble Mountain where I am actually scaling down everything a lot. I don't know, I'm just getting a lot more perspective of how achievable things are within this game. So, last community. This one is in the same style as the last one, and I guess the difference between this one and the last one is that we are working with more apartment blocks than individual houses. So I guess like this is still in the same realm of affordability. Maybe this one's a little bit cheaper because these are actually smaller places, but probably the footprints of people's houses, like their actual private houses within these blocks, are probably the same size or maybe a little bit bigger. And at first I was a bit hung up with how, I guess, repetitive all these houses are, these apartment blocks are, but checking out Google Earth, I can pretty much confirm that it's pretty much a copy and paste job in terms of these areas. They're practically the same apartment block, just in different areas with different angles, with different attachments to them. And I decided to make the buildings themselves bigger by just splicing 2 of them together. And I think, it creates just a much bigger footprint for what I actually want to build in this area. I think the individual apartment blocks by themselves was just a little bit too small for this area. And I'm also, again, fighting with the terrain. We've got a big terrain difference, massive height difference with this area, which is a real pain. And I'm going for a really under-detailed technique for this area, which I think works really well in terms of getting this block finished within a realistic time frame. But I would really love to go back and properly detail something like this down the track in maybe another location in Springwood, because I do find these areas really fascinating. I find it really bizarre. I don't know, it's just like a really strange way of building a neighborhood. Well, I guess it's not really that strange, because it makes sense to build the same style of house, within the same area. and it's probably a really effective way of building a neighborhood, but I really find the look of these places so bizarre, and they always have such a weird structure to them compared to the rest of the city. You know, like cities have this really organic way of growing, you know, as like, you know, hundreds of years have gone by and the city has, you know, expanded. There's just no uniqueness. They're all the same block. They all look exactly the same. Only the communities themselves are different from one another, but even still, they don't really differ that much. But I guess the really nice thing about all the styles of communities that I've just built over the last 17 minutes is they're always built with, I guess, the focus beam community, where there's always some sort of communal area, and everyone's house looks exactly the same, so no one's living in something that's different. But I've never lived in a community that looks like this, so I don't know if that actually works in that way, or whether people just still stay inside their house and go to work and close the doors and that's it. But who knows? Guys, that is pretty much it for today's episode. It was a pretty fast one. I smashed through quite a bit of work, and I hope it was a little bit more interesting than me just pasting down the same style of neighborhoods over and over again. Guys, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to leave a like. That would be amazing. Helps me out a ton. If you want to hit me up with any feedback as well, I'm not going to change anything that I've built, but I definitely am always interested in your opinions and ideas for the rest of the city too. But that is it, guys. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one. See you later.